I don't want no oil spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I am here, quote-unquote, here with my fabulous co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, together Rebecca and I are going to fashion an incredible hour of radio we call For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your pets and your friends and the flowers you have outside your house and basically everybody and everything, because we're all wrapped up together in this wonderful ball that we call the planet Earth. And we got a good show lined up for you today. We're going to just chat for a few more minutes here. And today, actually, once again, you can text us at 419-973-5841. That's 419-973-5841, because Rebecca and I are both doing the show remotely. I'm off in Western New York, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But also at any time, you can call in at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. And we'll get you on the air. We'd love to talk to people about ecology and the environment, and that's what we're all about here. And so after we chat for a few more minutes, then I have a really good interview with a fella named Brett Hartl. And Brett Hartl works for the Center for Biological Diversity, and he is the one, we reported on this last week, he's achieved a degree of fame by calling the Inflation Reduction Act a climate suicide pact. And we're going to talk to him about why is he so down on that thing that most of the mainstream media is like touting this as a huge Democrat victory, but we have to keep our eyes open. That's the problem with ecology versus politics. The ecological truth of these actions the government takes is different from the political truth, and unfortunately, it's in the conflict between political reality, which actually is an oxymoron, and real reality always wins in the end. Anyway, so that's our interview. We'll hear from Brett Hartl soon. Then we'll hear from our wonderful advertisers and sponsors. And then I have a nice little announcement to make. It's something the Wood County Park District is doing. Then we will hear from Rebecca. And Rebecca, what will you be talking to us about this week?
I will be doing a short segment called What a Bunch of Ice Holes.
Okay. All right. Looking forward to that. Yes. Okay. Then we have ecological news, and there's a whole bunch of ecological news to talk about this week. And as I said at the start, hopefully we'll hear from you at some point at 419-973-5841 for a text, or 877-909-1007 to call in. So I'm doing the show remotely this week, back on the internet. And the reason is that I am in Western New York for my brother-in-law's wake. There's going to be a little celebration of his life this afternoon. And I talked a little bit about his passing a few weeks ago. But I want to talk a little bit about Western New York here. Just we're just west of Rochester, just east of Buffalo. And it's really a beautiful area. It's very lush and very rural, and unfortunately they've been having a drought here, and the corn this year I've noticed is very short, very few ears, leaves all curled up. Now we did get some rain last night, so I think the drought might have actually broken just this last night, but this area is largely undeveloped, and I was able finally those of you who listen to the show know I've been looking for this all summer. I finally got to see the Milky Way last night. That's how, undeveloped this region is, and mostly farmland. The sky is dark enough. I was finally able to get a nice look at the Milky Way, and that's just a really beautiful thing. It's kind of interesting. Last night, I have 6 siblings. Okay, good, nice Catholic family, and for the first time in a long time, all 7 of us got together last night and just had a nice little time by ourselves, except for one unfortunate niece who kind of got caught in the fray. We warned her not to hang out with us, but anyway, it was a really nice time. But towards the end of the evening, the conversation steered over into alternative energy, and my siblings repeated some of the myths that are being tossed out there right now about alternative energy and switching to electric cars and things like that. And we've talked about this in the past, but it bears repeating that the purpose of propaganda now has changed. I mean, once upon a time, propaganda was convincing people of ridiculous stuff, no matter how ridiculous and inaccurate. Now propaganda, all it needs to do is cast doubt on changing. If you just make people doubt whether or not changing is a good idea, then they just continue doing what they're doing, and they never make a change. And that's sort of the goal now of the propaganda that the fossil fuel industry is putting out, because the fossil fuel industry has to die. But if they can cast doubt on all the alternatives, everyone will just keep using fossil fuels, because they'll be like, well, I'm not so sure about switching to that, or I'm not sure about switching over to that. And so my siblings, repeated some of the most frequent myths going on about alternative energy. And so I wanted to sort of go through them real quick, some of the things I heard, because these are also the things I see on the internet. These are things I hear other people talking about. One is lithium mining. The arguments being made that we shouldn't switch over to battery powers because lithium mining is so horrible. And it is true that lithium mining is destructive, but you have to keep in mind compared to what? And what it's compared to is the fossil fuel industry. And compared to, let's say, tar sands mining or developing oil fields or coal mining, lithium mining is just a tiny fraction of the badness that the current fossil fuel industry is creating. It's like saying, it's like saying, it's like getting 1,000 lashes versus getting 10 lashes. Okay, 10 lashes is bad, it's painful, but 1,000 lashes will kill you, and we are being killed right now. I mean, literally, huge swaths of the planet. The Niger Delta comes to mind, for example, have been changed into an uninhabitable, lifeless zone, huge swaths of it, by mining for fossil fuels, by drilling for petroleum in that case. And so lithium mining is bad. It can't be sugar-coated, but it's not as bad as mining for oil and gas. And the one important note, we've talked about this before, batteries don't have to be lithium. Australia, they've developed an aluminum carbon battery, which could be made with recycled materials. And, so what we need to do is get off of lithium and get onto the more common things that don't require creating new mines in pristine areas the way lithium mining does right now. Yeah, lithium mining's bad, but switching to battery power is good. Switching to electrical power. And when you think about it, with lithium mines, you don't get any pipeline breaks. You don't get oil spills. You don't have to destroy the huge swaths of the lands like they're doing up in Canada for the tar sands and creating these dead zones that can be seen from outer space. So lithium mining is bad, but the true alternative, of course, is to have enough public transportation that you don't need to have tons and tons of electric cars running around. What you'd want is something that can power itself, basically. And speaking of that, my brother, who's an electrician, had talked about several myths that are going around electric car chargers. And one thing that he was saying is that most households don't have enough capacity. Their service on their house is maybe 100 amps, and so they can't have two big electric car chargers going at the same time. And there's several things about that. One is that a level 2 charger only uses 7 kilowatts at a time, and that's less than, let's say, an electric furnace. It's in the range of something like an electric stove, or it's a little more. It's about double an electric stove, so it's not that much power. If you have two electric cars, if you just charge them one after the other, and most electric cars allow you to schedule when the charging is going to happen, so you can tell one to charge from. It takes about 2 hours on a level 2 to charge a car like mine up. So I can tell it to charge one from 10 to 12 and the other from 12 to 2. But the real thing is that we also need to be putting rooftop solar on houses, so that there's solar power going into the grid where the electric cars are taking power off the grid. And in my case, I have just a little 6 kilowatt system, which is not that big. And I have the electric car charger, 7 kilowatts of electric charge. And net, my household electricity use has gone down. I've cut off about half my electricity use because the solar panels, of course, put power onto the grid even when I'm not charging my car. And when I am charging my car, it prevents most of the power from coming off the grid. And so if we put solar panels up everywhere we're going to be charging, like they have at the Toledo Museum of Art, like they have at Owens Corning, then the grid doesn't need to get a huge revision, because if you're producing the power where you're using the power, the grid doesn't need to transfer it thousands of miles to charge somebody else's car. So all these problems have technical solutions. These are all technical and engineering problems. They're not fundamental problems, because fundamentally there's plenty of solar power to power all our transportation needs, even if we're doing it with cars. Of course, there's even more than we need if we do it with mass transit, with a good mass transit system. But again, all these things are getting put out on the internet. People are making all these arguments, and the purpose is not to actually find the truth of the situation. The purpose is just to create enough doubt in you, the average person, that the politicians don't feel the need to make the change, even though continuing on the same course is definitely killing us. I mean, there's no doubt that all this CO2 we're putting into the air is destroying the planet and threatens to destroy our whole society.
You see that thing about the Loire River going dry this week?
Yes. Yep. And
I keep thinking about all those love songs about I'll love you till the rivers all run dry. I guess like millions of couples today are saying, let's just be friends.
Yeah, time's up.
Yeah, I don't love you anymore. Sorry, bye.
Yeah, rivers are dry. I'm out of here. Yeah. So we have to change, and we have a path to change. So don't let the people pushing this propaganda put so much doubt in your mind that you don't change, that you just putter along the way we've been doing, because that's certain disaster. All right. There's no doubt that if we keep putting out more carbon into the air, we're done for. All right. And it's kind of funny because my brother Daniel brought up that like 20 years ago, I had predicted that this area, Western New York, because the climate here is moderated by Lake Erie and Lake Ontario to the north, I said this is going to be one of the most desirable places in the country to live because it's not going to feel the full effects of global warming for a long time. And, he brought that up as if I was wrong 20 years ago, but in reality, I'm right, because this is exactly what's happening here. There's all kinds of new development. People from New York City who've lived through hurricanes have decided to move out to like Buffalo. Buffalo's having a huge renaissance. Real estate.
Wait a minute. So is he saying that Buffalo is being affected by global warming then? Because that seems like not detracting from his own point.
Yeah, he was saying I was wrong when I was saying that people were going to try to move in here as global warming got worse. But in fact, I'm right. The actual fact of the matter didn't stick in his mind. He was just like, oh yeah, Joe 20 years ago was saying this, and I was saying it, and I'm right.
And that's actually happening now.
The facts. He was kind of cloudy on it. He was more focused on me being wrong than the actual situation. And unfortunately, that happens a lot. That this is an emotional thing. I mean, people don't want us environmentalists to be right because if they accept that we're right, they have to make changes in their life. And, that scares people. And trust me, we ecologists, we environmentalists, we also don't want to be right. we wish
and
we
are
were
scared
wrong about this. Yeah, I mean, this is not something we're saying because, we just want to say it and be right about it and lord it over people who don't know what we know. No, we're saying this because if we don't change, all of us, believers and non-believers, climate deniers, and people who accept science, we're in tremendous trouble. So don't let the propaganda prevent you from doing what you need to do. Get your house insulated. Get an electric car. Stop using so much power, and let's all work together on this, folks, and not let ourselves be pulled aside by the propaganda. So, all right, that was my rant. Whew. All right. Now it's time.
It was a doozy.
Well, thank you. But now it's time to go to our interview, and we talked a little bit about this issue last week, basically when we reviewed the Inflation Reduction Act, and I quoted Brett Hartl, and so this week I was able to land an interview with him, which was very nice. He's an incredibly busy guy, so we're very grateful he took the time to talk with us. But Josh, let's go ahead and run that interview.
Sure. My name is Brett Hartl. I'm the Government Affairs Director at the Center for Biological Diversity.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on for A Green Future. The reason I wanted to interview you this week is because, well, of course, the big news last week was the whole Inflation Reduction Act, and you were quoted in a couple media stories as saying something pretty intense about it, basically. Yeah, you called it a climate suicide pact, and that caught my eye. And so I'm wondering, could you just tell us a little bit about why you called it that and what's going on?
Sure. So the Inflation Reduction Act, obviously a lot of folks are touting the increased funding for renewable energy that's in the bill, and it is the largest investment potentially in renewable energy that this nation has ever made. I note it's also the only investment in renewable energy that this country has ever really made. So it is simultaneously the largest as well as just the only. But buried in the text of the bill are multiple provisions that protract and extend the life of fossil fuels in this country by another decade. One provision reinstates several offshore leases in the Gulf of Mexico, as well as the Cook Inlet of Alaska, leases that were thrown out by the federal courts based on climate grounds, because their environmental analyses did not account for the massive impacts to the climate they would have. And it would simply reinstate those leases.
In fact, you folks are the ones that fought those leases on that ground, right? at the Center for Biological Diversity.
Us as well as many others. We were not alone. I mean, these are big efforts, so we're not going to, take the only credit. Like, there were many people involved in fighting them, and we won because we were right, and these leases were very damaging. But now they're simply going to be reinstated, and then the companies that basically made the high bid are going to get their bids reinstated, and they're going to be basically green-lighted to drill. In addition,
wow,
the bill also says that it basically holds hostage all renewable energy development on public lands and waters. So offshore wind, onshore wind, solar in the deserts on public lands, and basically says that you can't do any renewable energy on public lands unless every year we also lease for fossil fuels 2 million acres onshore and 60 million acres offshore every year. So that's over 10 years. That's 600 million acres offshore, 20 million acres onshore. 600 million acres is 3 times the size of the Gulf of Mexico. And 20 million acres, is roughly the size of all of the national parks in the lower 48, not including Alaska. There's some big ones up there. But that is an unsustainably large amount of oil and gas development that is effectively locked in for the next 10 years when the IPCC and the UN Secretary General and leading scientists around the world are saying we need to stop new fossil fuel infrastructure, new fossil fuel investments yesterday, not extend them for 10 more years if we have any chance of meeting the 1.5 C target that we've all agreed to in the Paris Accord. So it's sort of like, maybe we're moving one step forward, one step back. Maybe it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But we know that the 1 step back is definitely happening. And no one really knows, to be honest, whether companies will take these tax breaks, whether the renewable energy promises will be met. We certainly hope they are. We hope that this is the transformational bill that people are saying it is, but it doesn't feel that way. And it may not come to pass. So, yeah, the reason I said it was a climate suicide pact was because it does seem to be one of those situations where we're sort of tying ourselves to fossil fuels unnecessarily for another decade and somehow hoping that by doing so, we're going to save the climate while we're simultaneously causing massive harm to the climate. That does not seem like the best approach from a policy perspective.
No, it seems pretty... It seems the opposite of what we want to be doing, really. I mean, it seems to be we're all arguing right now about, on the whole, does the bad stuff outweigh the good stuff? But it seems to be what we should be asking is, why is there any bad stuff in there at all? There's no scientific doubt about what's going on. And so making these bad policy decisions just also there's tax credits for things like wind and solar, but isn't there like direct support, like cash money for things like nuclear, for example?
It's mostly just tax credits across the board. The small pots of money that might be direct support are not that big in the big scheme of things.
What are your comments on sort of the way this bill came down? I mean, everyone thought nothing was happening for months, and then all of a sudden, boom, a 750-page or 725-page document just appeared. What do you think of how that happened? How does that compare to the way like other bills have shown up in the past?
Yeah, it's not, entirely out of the norm for Congress to hash out deals behind closed doors. Obviously there was the much larger Build Back Better Act. There were much larger proposals that came out of the House. A lot of these ideas have obviously floated around for a while, and it's not uncommon where a small group of members do hash things out behind closed doors to actually reach a compromise. I think what was unfortunate here was that the things that Senator Manchin demanded were never vetted by anyone, or never saw the light of day before they were just revealed to the public. Like, Senator Manchin never offered any of his legislation about holding hostage renewable energy to fossil fuels at any point before this day. So, the most likely scenario is that the fossil fuel industry wrote it for him and gave it to him, and then he passed it along to Chuck Schumer, and that was it. So none of those ideas were ever given the chance for the public writ large to digest them, to understand them before they were, shoved down everybody's throats. And that's just, I would just say not actually the high watermark of our sort of legislative tradition, right? Even if people want to celebrate this bill as a major accomplishment, I think we should also be clear-eyed that the bad things in this bill, really were not particularly democratic or transparent or open to the public. And the reason being is that they're incredibly toxic, harmful, and counterproductive. So, it does happen. It's not the first time. It won't be the last time. But it does not necessarily speak well for the Senate as the deliberative body that it thinks that it is.
Yeah, I think basic knowledge is sort of a fundamental aspect to having a democracy. If people don't know what's going on, how could they participate democratically?
Right, and Senator Manchin has never really cared about that. He stood in the way of the, reforming the filibuster, which effectively blocked almost every effort to improve the function of the Senate, to make the process more democratic, to make sure that fundamental civil rights are protected, to make sure abortion rights are protected. He does not particularly care about the people. Let's be honest, he's a millionaire who has his own coal company, who's enriched himself and his family by doing what the coal industry and the fossil fuel industry wants. He's not particularly concerned about his constituents or the American people. He just wants to get paid.
Well, that does raise a question that I think a lot of people were asking before this bill came out, and that is, why is Joe Manchin the chair of the Energy Subcommittee?
Well, there's a technical answer and there's a politics answer. And the technical answer was he was the most senior, and seniority in the Senate is paramount. It can be circumvented, but he's also the 50th vote in an evenly divided Senate, and if they didn't give him that position, he would have probably flipped and become a Republican. And then obviously. And this is the devil of politics. And again, I'm not defending any of this crap in the sense that it's just, the end product is not awesome. But, if he had switched parties, then the Republicans would have controlled the Senate and even less would have been accomplished. And those are the calculations that, Democrats have to make, that Chuck Schumer have to make. And I don't pretend that they get them right all the time. And I'm not defending them, but that was the calculus that they made.
Okay, I see. So there's going to be, I guess, probably there's going to be reaction to this. People are going to, organizations, that fought so hard to, for example, to keep the Gulf closed based on the climate. Those issues haven't gone away, but is the fact that now it's been put into law, does that pretty much mean there can't be court challenges?
I would say the good news is that at least the provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act, because they didn't have any transparency, because they were baked up by probably the fossil fuel industry, they're not actually perfectly written. We actually still can, and we absolutely will challenge, every lease and every drilling permit and every attempt to extract more fossil fuels from the ground, and those doors are still open to us. It's not 100% clear in terms of, Senator Manchin has also basically demanded the approval of the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which again, environmental groups have successfully stopped. It's not as clear if that has been foreclosed. We may not be able to challenge that in court. The good news is, the only silver lining is that we are going to continue fighting as hard as we can to stop as many of these leases from becoming, fully developed oil producing fields. And we're going to do everything we can to stop those in court. And we still are able to.
Okay. Well,
So not all hope is lost on that front.
all right, great. And just to sort of wind up, are there any other issues that you're working on now that you think it would be important for people to know about?
Well, the biggest thing that's happening right now is, as part of the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, there was, what they call this side deal that Senator Manchin made, where he is going to get more, what he calls permitting reform, but what really is a weakening of the National Environmental Policy Act and the Clean Water Act and other laws to expedite the approval of large infrastructure projects, including fossil fuels. We all expect that bill to come out in September. He's been promised that it will pass regardless of the opposition, regardless of how terrible it is. That is a fight still to come. It's still a fight that maybe we can win. But, unfortunately, we're not done yet with Senator Manchin's efforts to further tilt the playing field towards the fossil fuel industry. So that's the big looming fight that's going to happen in the second half of September.
Yeah, it seems like when there's side deals or future deals promised to the environmental side, somehow those never materialize. But it seems kind of extraordinary to me that Manchin could have been promised that a side deal will pass without doubt.
Yeah, we'll see. He feels pretty confident. He has enormous leverage, and it's unfortunate. And it's unfortunate that he's so hostile to, renewable energy and a livable planet. But again, we'll fight it. But he thinks it's a done deal. So he probably has a few tricks up his sleeve we don't know about yet. But yeah, it is, again, not a particularly impressive moment in the legislative tradition of this country.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Brett. And Josh, thanks for playing that. And thank you folks for listening to it. Yeah, it's pretty grim. And it just, I'm sorry that I have to have a show where I can give the details that the mainstream media isn't giving, because everybody should know that Joe Manchin's been promised more offshore oil leases than physically exist on the planet. But, that everything gets boiled down to a few lines and a few headlines that people just repeat over and over again. But we try to bring you that little bit of extra information that makes all the difference here on For a Green Future. We got a text from a listener, and feel free to text us for the rest of this hour at 419-973-5841. And the listener said, the other day we received a card from the Ohio Electricity Litigation regarding the monthly surcharge for electric service in Ohio pursuant to HB 6. And yeah, it's important to note, and we have an HB 6 story coming up, that people are still being charged on their electric bills, and that money is going straight to support the coal plants, one in Ohio and one in Indiana, that HB 6 bailed out. So it's a nasty thing. It needs to be fought, and it needs to be fully repealed, as we've said many times. And so there are lawsuits lining up, and you could make an argument that if a law is based on bribes and corruption, which this law was, that the law itself should be tossed out because it wasn't part of the, like our guest said, it wasn't part of a democratic legislative process. It was, hey, I've got $60 billion. I want to bribe you guys to make a law for me. That and the guys were like, yeah, we'll do that for you. And that's not what our legal, that's legally, that should be, well, that is illegal. They broke laws. They confessed to breaking laws. And so the law that they made should be struck down. So let's see what happens there. All right, time to hear from our wonderful advertisers and patrons. Yay! For Green Futures brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. Several ways to get a hold of them and find out what they're doing. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. Also go to their website, wcparks.org. And you can also search for them on all the social medias, Instagram, Facebook, etc., etc. Just go search for WC Parks. And we also have an announcement from the Wood County Park District. This is not part of advertising time. This is part. We are willing to make any kind of announcement for any organization that is basically ecologically based. And so this announcement is that the annual native plant sale is going to happen for the Wood County Park District, and that's going to be Saturday, September 24th from 9 a.m. to noon. And they are offering native plants, and native plants have all kinds of benefits for your local ecology or local environment. And they've got, I just want to zip through this. They're offering silky dogwood, buttonbush, ninebark, black choke cherry, sand cherry, sycamore, elderberry, lobelia, cardinal flower, cup plant, dense blazing star, dogbane, false aster, Indian coneflower, Indian grass, little blue stem, obedient plant, spiderwort, partridge pea, prickly pear, purple lovegrass, purple prairie clover, rattlesnake master, sneezeweed, and more. All kinds of wild bergamot. That's one of my favorites. If you get wild bergamot growing in your yard, it just smells wonderful. So mark that on your calendar, September 24th. And of course, For Green Future is also brought to you by our wonderful patrons. And our patrons are people who've gone to patreon.com. They search for Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page. They chose a membership level that matched their budgets. And every month a little bit comes out of their accounts. It comes over to us. And that's how we can afford to talk to you, because unfortunately putting this show on the air is not free. So thank you so much to our patrons. You really make this show possible. And one of the things we do with this show is we bring you some interesting information, like the story Rebecca is about to share with us. Rebecca, let's hear about ice holes.
Alrighty. Well, this subject was suggested by a gentleman we ran across a couple of times at the Wood County Fair, who I guess lives in California and comes back to visit once a year. Anyway, he thought I should write about glacial moulins, so that's how this started out. A glacial moulin, which I'm really not sure how you pronounce them. I don't understand French. It doesn't have enough consonants. But yeah, it's a large circular shaft in a glacier or ice sheet that transports meltwater from the top to the base. Apparently, sometimes they only go to the middle. They only go to the middle of the glacier, and they feed into like glacial caves and streams and glaciated lakes. There's just a whole cave system sometimes going on inside a glacier. But mostly they eventually get down to the base of the glacier and tend to accelerate its speed of expansion and also calving, glacial calving. Yeah, there's some guy who thinks that I read a paper by who thinks that sometimes they do that, and other times they just make them do most of their expansion earlier in the season, but they shorten the season because it's like a more efficient way of transporting water instead of it like those big super glacial lakes that are hanging out on the surface. What happens is they find a crevasse or something. Ice hole type number 2, crevasse. But yeah, they find a crevasse and just kind of work at it and expand it, and they have, grit and sometimes rocks in them, and they just hollow it out to a big shaft. It looks kind of like a grain silo to me, like if you could fit one inside of one of these, basically. There don't seem to be small moulins as far as I can tell. I could be wrong, but it seems like they very quickly get big because there's a lot of water that wants to go down them. So, yeah, formed when meltwater erodes surface ice. They're basically they're an ice sinkhole. They're a glacial sinkhole, basically. Trickles into crevasse, erodes it into a vertical shaft, and then in the winter they tend to fill back up with ice and reform in the same place over and over again in subsequent summers. And when the glacier goes away completely, they leave something. They leave a pothole behind, basically similar to something called a fluvial pothole, which is kind of like a little kind of round, cylindrical shaft carved out of rock by a river, where there's sort of an eddy or a whirlpool or something, and little rocks and gravel go around and around and around for years and years, and form one of these little things, except for they're different. You can tell they're not fluvial potholes because they tend to be on like a hilltop or steep slopes often. And formed by grit and rocks, moved around by eddies. So right, these are the I had to for a minute do a little research to find out these are not the same thing as criconite holes, which turn out to be little sort of pockmarks in the glacier. Small patch. They form when a small patch of dark sediment on the surface makes it melt faster because it's dark and it attacks more heat, absorbs more heat. So then they go a little ways down and then they fill with water, and the water is full of microbes. Criconite holes, I believe, can range from like 4 meters to just big enough to drive a semi into. Yeah, I saw some big ones and some small ones, so they vary a lot more. So yeah, the microbes are, I guess, good. They're considered to be good because they contribute nutrients when they eventually get connected to a ice-covered lake or a stream or something. They contribute nutrients, and there's just an insane amount of diversity of bacteria in there. You got proteobacteria, cyanobacteria, actinobacteria, bacteroidetes, I believe, acidobacteria, archaea, including halobacteria, methanobacteria, and thermoplasmata. My goodness. I didn't even know there were that many kinds. Now I'm a little curious about what they all are. And apparently they can do this because the grit that has the germs on it comes from both local sources and distant sources, including fossil fuel plants and things, sediment from those, or just eroded rock, whatever, just grit. It's what happens when you let your glacier get dusty, basically. So yeah, those are at least 2 kinds of 3 if you count crevasses, 3 kinds of holes that occur in glaciers. Probably there are others. Let me know.
All right. Well, that's cool. And so when the water gets all the way down between the glacier and the ground, then it kind of lubricates it, right? That causes the glacier to flow more quickly.
Yep, it's like a glacial slippy slide, basically. Only, and I don't know if the glaciers enjoy it or not. Probably not. I don't know.
I don't know. So, all right. Well, great. Well, thanks, Rebecca, for that interesting report on ice holes. So
You're welcome.
Now it's time to go on to ecological news. Oh, we got a text here. Someone texted, "Dark skies, good for birds and insects," and then they put the word environment in all caps with an exclamation point. Dark skies.
Oh, referring to your thing about Buffalo.
Yeah, the area around here between Rochester and Buffalo, it's very dark skies. It's beautiful. Right now, as things develop, that might change, but still at this time, it's a beautiful area for looking at the stars. All right. So now on to ecological news. First story covers something that kind of taps on what our guest was talking about last week, and that is the Biden policy of quote unquote treating areas to prevent forest fires, which, as we covered last week, is a dangerous fantasy. And
that sounds like a euphemism for poisoning the heck out of them. Is that what they're doing?
Well, they're mostly it's clear cutting them. The idea is you get rid of all the trees, there's nothing to burn.
Right, except for a lot of grass.
Yeah, grass and shrubs, which actually burn more quickly and hotter than forests do. So
presumably the answer is just to pave everything over. And then no more fires, right?
I think that's their final goal, yeah. But,
yeah.
Of course, asphalt does catch fire too. But, yeah,
Right.
now there was an article in the Washington Post. California's giant sequoias are burning up. Will logging save them?
I'm thinking no. No, it will not.
I'm thinking no too. I mean, it's like, will burning the village down save it? No.
Let's look into the definition of this word save.
Save, right, yeah. So it's a story by Joshua Partlow, August 16th. It's kind of funny because the forest ecologist for the National Park Service, who's like, yeah, let's log. One of his things is he said, these fires were so bad, I don't know if the saplings, I don't know if the forests can regenerate. And and so there's a picture of him sitting amongst bird sequoias, and all around him are sequoia seedlings that have popped up since the fire. So
That's odd.
So your answer, Tony Caprio, is yes, the forest can regenerate. And as we learned talking to our guest, Ralph Blomer, last week, all that carbon in all those sequoias, even the dead one, is sequestered. And if you cut them down, and the plans are to cut them down and use the timber for construction, but also to power wood-powered electric power plants. And so the answer is, those will put all that carbon into the air. And, we have to be doing everything we can to continue to sequester carbon and not literally just take it and put it in the air. And so they quote another forest ecologist here who says, the best thing to do is to let the forest regenerate itself, because forests have had fires in the past and they know how to do this. But it's a huge controversy because Biden wants it and the Republicans want it. The Republicans are the ones who pushed for this plan to treat 50 million acres, which it means mostly clear-cut 50 million acres, which again is insane. It's an area larger than South Dakota. But there's a huge battle brewing over that, and it looks like one of the areas, it's a war, and one of the battle sites is now Yosemite, because that's where the lines are being drawn over the areas of Yosemite that got severely burned in the last fire season, and Biden wants to get in there, just turn all that stuff into, burn it more in power plants and turn it into charcoal, and the point is made in this article that actually creates the Chad Hansen, a wildfire ecologist, makes the point that actually creates the condition for wildfires. So that's story number one. Story number two. Let's see how we're doing for time here. Oh, we're running pretty low. Okay, I'm going to have to dump a couple stories. Moving on to, there was an article August 15th in the Capitol Journal, the Ohio Capitol Journal, and kudos to Jake Zuckerman, who did a beautiful article, wonderful act of just basic reporting. Basically, he went, and there have been a whole bunch, this is about House Bill 6, and there have been a whole bunch of court cases about it already. And so a lot of things like emails and text messages have been discovered as part of these legal actions. And so he went back through them with a fine-tooth comb and basically was able to finally link Mike DeWine to House Bill 6. So, all this time the reporting has been, was the governor involved? Was he not involved? It's not clear. It's clear now. Mike DeWine and his administration were intimately involved as the bribes were being negotiated, as the plans were being laid. There's all kinds of text messages and phone logs and and then there's the appointment of Sam Randazzo to the Public Utilities Commission. And we've reported on this before, that there was a letter to DeWine from a whole bunch of environmental organizations saying you can't appoint Randazzo to the PUCO because he's just a lobbyist for First Energy. He's an employee of First Energy, and you don't want the guy who's an employee of a company being the one who's in charge of regulating that company because they won't.
Fox's hen houses, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And he also received a 200-page dossier, from one of DeWine's own campaign staffers, did exhaustive research on Randazzo and said, look, this guy works for First Energy. He's not going to work for you if he gets into the PUCO. But one of the things that Zuckerman found was that DeWine asked First Energy who they wanted as chair of the PUCO. Beautiful. Yeah, so it's like, it's like going to Capone and saying, who do you want, running the who do you want running the police department here in Chicago, Mr. Capone? Just give me an opinion. And so excellent reporting. I urge everybody to read it. Text messages, phone calls, and of course, we already know that First Energy contributed $1 million to Mike DeWine's campaign. And I just wanted to think about that for a minute because they contributed $1 million, and what House Bill 6 originally gave them was $6 billion in direct charges against us. And so I just wanted to point out that's a 600,000% return on investment.
Not too shabby.
No, it's very, very inexpensive in terms of what you put in versus what you get out. But very, very expensive in terms of protecting the planet because right now Ohioans, like we said, are subsidizing 2 huge coal plants, and not just any coal plants, the dirtiest, oldest, most carbon-intensive coal plants in the country, and we're getting direct charges on all our electric bills to support those coal plants, thanks to House Bill 6, and as we can now say, thanks to the wonderful reporting of Mr. Zuckerman, Mike DeWine. So he is up for re-election this year, and it does appear that his opponent, Nan Whaley, is going to be making something of this, but we'll see what happens. All right, just a few minutes left, and one thing I wanted to talk about was a great New Yorker article came out August 13th, and the title is How Safe Are Nuclear Power Plants? And it was by Daniel Ford. And he was actually reviewing a report by a fellow who was the archivist for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I mean, he's literally employed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to look back over all their records and pluck out the most important ones and sort of make reports. And so he made a report called Safe Enough? A History of Nuclear Power and Accident Risk. And that actually came out in March of 2021. But essentially what Mr. Wellock documented here was that all the predictions of the likelihood of a nuclear disaster were sheer fantasy. They literally just plucked numbers out of the air and stuck them in to say that there's only going to be a nuclear disaster once every 10,000 years, roughly. And of course, now we know, with 50 years of experience with nuclear plants, that those actually happen about once every 10 years. And this actually...
Well, that's great news, because what's okay, if they've been happening once every 10, that's 5 times, what'd you say, 10,000 or something?
Yeah, great.
So we're not due one for another one for a very long time, Joe.
Well, unfortunately...
We got them all out of the way early, and now we can just coast, right? No. Okay, never mind.
Well, it'd be wonderful.
They keep happening every 10 years, aren't they?
Yeah, I'm afraid it may be, and we are due. It's been 10 years, all 11 since the last one, and the lead, the nuke plant that's in the lead for being the next meltdown is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which the mainstream media has been reporting on this to some degree. That's in the Ukraine, and Russia took it in the first days of the war. And what they've done is they just recently, it's been being run by the Ukrainian technicians who ran it since it was built. They booted them out this past week, and it looks like they may be setting it up to blow up the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and blame it on Ukraine. And there's this very scary stuff happening there. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that. But remember, any country that has nuclear power, including the United States, has given all their enemies nuclear weapons because those plants can be blown up and cause disasters. All right, well, sorry to end on such a downer note, but thanks so much for listening. We've come to the end of the show. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us hustling and fighting, and I do believe it's time